What is the date? It's January 26th?
Correct.
Right.
Of the year 2008.
Nine.
Thank you. For the correct feedback. We're very pleased and honored to have with us tonight to talk to us Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan is an old friend of mine, and he was one of the very first people in the very first beginnings of understanding the significance of new media that was coming on the scene back around 1968 and so forth, when cable in a serious way was just getting established. He was part of the collective called Rain Dance. It was a sort of thing, a play on Rand Corporation, R&D, in terms of video and the implications of video. And he studied with, down the hall from Marshall McLuhan, no less, and he was also very closely aligned with oh, good grief. Gregory Bateson, of course, the cyberneticist and so forth. And he's going to be talking to us about the early days of cable and so forth, and then we'll be able to ask some questions. I just want to say a couple words here. This is the 26th of the January, and we're just now on the verge. I would have liked, we will, maybe in the February meeting, we'll be able to talk some about specific issues as far as cable television is concerned. I'm wondering why there aren't some producers on the board. Other questions I have about the way things could be organized. I think it might be good to revisit the things Gloria Messer put together as a sort of a producer's Bill of Rights, how the place could be organized. I would like to know better exactly how quickly we're going to be moving into a new technological orientation to what we've been doing as the franchise is realized over maybe within a month from now. They're going to realize the agreement of the franchise agreement companies and also Verizon now. And so we put some of that off for now, and we'll talk about it afterward. But Paul very kindly said that he could come and talk to us about some of the early days of cable television, and also some of the implications not only of cable television and video, but also now cybernetics with Mr. Bateson and so forth. And he's a really interesting fellow with a hugely long class record of keeping track of really important intellectual implications of electronic media. And so that's just a brief introduction. We'll have another meeting at the end of February where we can talk about some, the Bill of Rights and the bylaws and all that sort of thing. But for now, we're going to be able to be addressed by Paul Ryan. As I understand, the stream is going out now, and John Kowalski is here. And are people going to, if they're out watching on the stream, I know we got to. Paula says a hi, okay, and they're going to be able to bring some feedback to this meeting. But on that brief, it's such a pregnant time now. I mean, everything is up for grabs in a certain kind of way in terms of the organization of the society. People are walking on eggshells all over the place, from the banking industry on to even public access and so forth. So, but I think it'd be better for us to talk about those specific things maybe after that franchise agreement is announced, hopefully by the middle or end of February. So we'll have another meeting at the end of February. So anyway, I didn't mean to take the time, Paul, and I'm pleased and honored to welcome to you Paul Ryan, who's going to talk to us. And it might be, I'm going to get out of the picture here, and he's going to be able to talk some about his own introduction to video, his interest in that, and what the picture was like back around 1968 or 69 when the cable television, that medium of abundance that the Sloan Commission talked about, was coming into real fruition, and it's now grown greatly. But Paul, thanks a lot for coming out. Really appreciate it. So why don't you introduce yourself to them,
Sure,
and
okay.
he'll talk, and then we can ask some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. Since Harold asked me here, I've been trying to figure out to myself, we all right?
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out what could I say that hopefully would be useful to you and help you do whatever you're doing in terms of production for cable television. And so that's what I'll try and do. And I would welcome interruptions or questions as we go once I set out a big framework, or as Not as big as Harold sets out, but a big framework. A lot of you are familiar with McLuhan, and as you know, McLuhan argued that we went from an oral to a literate to an electric culture, all right? Oral culture was dominated by acoustic space, literate Western culture was dominated by the eye, and the electric culture introduced something else, some other way of organizing society that we have not yet figured out how to do well, or have not figured out how to do at all. McLuhan used to say the electronic culture was like an oral culture, that the oral culture was an analogy for what the electronic culture could be. One of McLuhan's associates, Walter Ong, did a whole book on what he called secondary orality, all right? And it's a fairly good way to describe an oral culture after a literate culture, which is what ours is. But in many ways, it doesn't get at the real structure of what's possible with electronic technology. Online, you'll see a lot of text that had to do with, well, cybernetic guerrilla warfare was one of the key texts that I was able to write. We're taking the image of war, taking the image of cybernetics, taking warfare as a way to change the social order. And change the social order so we wouldn't have any more Vietnams, hopefully. You know, I mean, a lot of us were involved in that effort in different ways. And I think a lot of it is still to be realized. It's for a people not yet, if you will. But in that context of using video as the video camera not to produce objects, but to use it as a feedback tool. So we followed strategies in schools of giving cameras to kids, of being out on the street with the video, of trying to feedback. You know, feedback is one of the big notions that comes out of cybernetics. It wasn't really operative in cultures in any formal way before that. Error correction, all right? We're not going to some fixed place in the future that we're going to go there no matter what. We're going to cut everything off in between and get there. What we're going to do is self-correct, organize ourselves individually as the meetings that followed World War II. So the idea was to use electronic technology to help shape a self-correcting, self-organizing, sustainable society that would, you know, address a lot of the issues that have got us by the throat now, okay? So, all right, so in that context, cable television became, as it were, a metaphor for what a community could be. Right? It was not just an individual with a camera, it was not just a small group, but the idea was that with electronic technology being used self-correctively and cybernetically, it was not just a distribution wing, but it was the beginning of a community that was wired for nurturing itself, for nurturing the landscape it was in. The programs were not in, the idea was not to import the programs from someplace else, but to recognize that where you lived, you were already programmed. Your life was programmed by automobiles, by credit cards, by geography, by architecture, and to try and learn what that program was and begin to think about it in ways that would alter it and make it more sustainable, okay? So that sort of early effort, again, I would refer to Radical Software. It's online, you can Google it. A lot of the text that came out of that and a lot of the movement to, not by violence, but by an intelligent use of this way of thinking and these tools, that we could in fact make some serious long-term difference in what was going on. As you know, it never turns out the way you hoped. There's a lot of questions that are still being raised, but at least now there's recognition. I mean, I think that with the politics the way they are nationally, there's another kind of opening. All right, that the next generation has an opportunity that some of us saw in the '60s. That what they do with that opportunity becomes very important. I teach at the New School now in the Graduate Media Studies program, and I say to the students, look, here's the situation I'm in. My generation is passing on to you an earth that's pretty well screwed up, all right? And we're supposed to teach you how to live sustainably, but we ourselves don't know how to live sustainably. Nor do we know how to teach you to live sustainably, all right? So in a certain sense, you've got to figure it out for yourself. Here are tools that we might have, or ways of thinking that we might have that might make it work, all right? And I do hold a lot of stock in cybernetic thinking and various uses, various ways of developing it. But it's still for the young people, it seems to me now, to figure out how to live sustainably. I mean, many of you, I'm sure, like myself, have children. It's hard to look a child in the face and know what you're doing to the earth, right? I mean, one of the things that Bateson used to say was, we've misidentified the unit of survival. Darwin misidentified the unit of survival. It's not me and my co-specifics or my species even, all right? Unit of survival is a flexible species in a flexible environment. Any species destroys the environment, destroys itself, okay? You can't live without an environment. And that's what humans are doing on this planet, you know, as we can see. You know, we're systematically destroying the environment that supports us, all right? So how to deal with television and video and technology in this context, in this emergent context, all right? Let me try and bring some of it there. Am I making some sense so far? All right, the contours, okay. All right.
One question, sir.
Please.
How long of a year span do you consider a generation?
28 years is what I generally figure.
20.
28. That's sort of.
Over the long haul, Paul, or over the recent?
It's more recent. You know, that's sort of the standard calculation.
Okay.
So I'm 65, right? So that means that I've seen 2 generations, all right? So my grandchildren are third generation. You know, we don't think in terms of generations in our culture. It's, you know, the Onondagas say, you know, why do you do this something that doesn't give you immediate profit? And they say, oh, we do it for the 7th generation.
No, but you see the profit in having a child.
You see the
Profit of the generation in having a child.
well,
Who will work for you? Who will sustain your name? Who will sustain your beliefs?
well, certainly there's some of that. Yeah, I mean, you know, but the point I'm trying to make is that as a species in an environment, over generations, we have to learn to live here well enough not to destroy it, all right? And clearly with climate change and the things that are going on, we're out of whack. We're doing that, okay?
One question also, again, is that the earth has destroyed itself repeatedly without human involvement,
Yeah,
whether it's geothermal,
fair enough. Okay.
and whether it's an ice age, whether it's a turn of the globe and such. Why does mankind consider itself so guilty of this prescient type of global warming? Perhaps it is something not human formed, but maybe geologically.
Well, I don't want to get off on that too much, right? Let me, you know, I mean, we can talk aside, but I disagree with you that the evidence is clearly that it's, I think, the effect of what we're doing. All right, it's
global warming.
Sir, yeah.
It's not just global warming.
No, it's not just global warming.
There are any number of metrics. We're destroying the planet's ability to support us. It's not a matter of like we got some guilt, like oops, we broke the planet. Well, sorry, I broke the planet. It's we are destroying environment and its ability to sustain us, and that's just global warming. You know.
It's the fisheries, it's the fisheries, it's the soil, it's the air. I mean,
you take a look at Tom Berry's book, The Great Work. It's an unbelievable description of what's going on, and with a heart that still has hope. It's quite amazing. But let me please, if I can, then try and bring it around to a kind of, I'm trying to say that there's some semblance between the 60s, early 70s, when we first chewed on this possibility, and now, you know, going 2010 or whatever, and what Obama is putting, or is what, unleashing, you know, whatever the hell's going on, it's fantastic in the sense of an opportunity, right? And in my mind, it may well be possible to use television in a very different way than we have been using it, all right? So I'm going back to McLuhan now, all right? And just to remind you, McLuhan argued that every medium has its own bias, all right, and its own prejudice, and it tends to, it opens up possibilities in terms of itself and not other mediums. So, but our general tendency is to do with the old medium, do with the new medium what the old one did. So you got a horseless carriage, all right? Or you have the print world digesting the oral culture, right? So, as you know, in the emergent world of all of us, there's been a running argument between what's the difference between film and television, or film and video, okay? I'm going to try a shot at it, not from McLuhan's point of view, but bear with me, okay? This is Stanley Cavell. He's a natural language philosopher. And what Cavell argues is that the difference between video and or television and film has to do with the fact that what film does is project a world view, all right? So Gone with the Wind is a view of the South and the morals of the South after the Civil War. Darth Vader is part of a world vision of good and evil, all right? The cinema actually projects a world view. I saw some of John Ford's movies. I've been looking at those, right? It's a projection of a world view, a Western, okay? Television, on the other hand, allows us to monitor events simultaneously with other people. Princess Di's death, Obama's election, man on the moon, football game, baseball. Enables us to monitor events simultaneously with others, all right? So if that's the case, and if television has emerged in this time where we're ecologically concerned, seriously concerned, my sense is that one of the ways that television could certainly be used is to monitor the environment, all right, systematically with other people, in such a way as we learn about it well enough not to destroy it, all right? And in abstraction, in a lot of ways, you know, one of the things I've done is design an environmental television channel, an entire television channel dedicated to monitoring the Hudson River Valley, the Hudson River Basin, for the people that live there, so they can understand it well enough not to destroy it, all right? And in order to do that, I took cybernetics and I took Charles Peirce, the American philosopher, has this brilliant semiotic system, and put them together, all right? A sign of something for somebody in some respect. Any of the programs you make, you can say, this is a video about something for somebody in some respect. So if you take that formulation, you say we're going to do a channel about the environment for the people that live there so they don't destroy it, right? Now notice this is a different sense of television than public access was conceived under, okay? This is the juxtaposition that I think might invite you to think about this in perhaps a way you might not have so far, right? Public access arose and was thought of in terms of free speech and First Amendment, all right? Had to do with everybody being able to say their piece in public. And it was a serious consideration because, as you know, in the 60s there were, what, 3 networks and Channel 13 and a few other handful of things. You couldn't get FaceTime, you know. You couldn't get electronic time. It was controlled by a small number of the best and the brightest, supposedly, right? That was one of the ways we screwed up, because we had an elite organizing things and not getting enough feedback. So breaking it open in the way we have, leaving it open so that there's YouTube, there's these other things, allows for something else to happen. but the formulation for public access in terms of freedom of speech, all right, which I'm not saying, I mean, it's critical. We keep our freedom of speech, but I'm saying, in my mind at least, it has to be somehow joined to this capacity television has to monitor things, all right? Monitoring is not free speech in and of itself. You know, what you monitor, you would interpret in many different ways. Different communities would interpret it in many different ways. And how could that be a concern of public access? Or is there some way to formulate or reformulate public access in terms of the ecological system? And I would argue to you that this is not another issue, all right? The environment is the context in which all these issues take place. The species is dead, you haven't got a problem with racism. You know? I mean, if the species is dead, it's not, you know, there's no economic... Huh?
Or any dead.
Yeah.
Problem with any of them.
Well, yeah, exactly. No, exactly. Well said. You know.
Oh, I object to that one.
Well,
Simply because there was a seed that was found in Israel of a palm tree.
there was, I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
A seed
Yes?
that was found in Israel. It was a palm. It was 2,000 years old, the seed.
Yeah.
And they were able to cultivate. At the same time also, there was a seed found from grapeseed up in northern Italy. And they were able to grow a grape vine.
Yes?
It's extraordinary how much you can find from the past.
I'm not arguing with that.
They may be able to clone a mastodon, apparently, Mr. What's his name tells us.
Yeah.
Well, lots of luck. What do we need one of
I
those?
didn't mean to-
I'm going to back off and listen a bit. I mean,
Whatever that nobody can eat.
Maybe even a dinosaur. Who knows?
what?
That
No.
was nonsense, that human seeds, we haven't figured out how to do that unless you're wealthy enough to put your stuff in a sperm bank.
To be frozen.
Yeah.
Didn't.
So, we have big danger ahead of us, and you're on target, so keep rolling. bro.
Yeah, keep rolling. Lay it out.
All right, all right. What about the practicality of that? Let me spin some things by you. I have experience with, a lot of experience with nonprofit groups and community organizing, and we're all, you know, sort of veterans. I would say weary veterans of that kind of situation. You know, I met Harold in New Paltz when we were trying to figure out how cable television could be used up there. You know, and the meetings and the people fighting and blah 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 blah, and you know, we all go away and ennobled and severely bitten, you know, in some way or another. All right. So well, that being the case, well, I didn't expect to go off on this one, but let me do it.
Go.
As some of you know, Gregory Bateson was responsible for the double-bind theory of schizophrenia. Double-bind theory of schizophrenia, and Bateson argued that it's something that we all do. The schizophrenics just get it worse, all right? But it's contradictory commands. The mother says to the child, you're so tired, dear, please, you know, you should go to bed, right? And the child is saying, but the child doesn't feel tired, all right? And the mother's body language is screaming at the child, 12 hours, I can't take any more, get the hell out of my sight. But in her voice she's saying, sweetheart, why don't you go to bed, all right? So the child is getting a contradictory command, all right? The child is caught in a double bind, all right? And we do it all the time, you know, in terms of our language. It's part of the function of language and how it works. Tell me you love me. I love you. How come you only tell me that when I ask you? You know, double bind, contradictory commands. So Bateson described human relations very carefully and come up with this double bind as a way to describe some of the things that happen. Another guy I work with is a man named Al Shefflin, who wrote The Non-Human Triumph. A man named Al Shefflin who wrote a book called How Behavior Means, all right? Shefflin was one of a group of 6 professionals and 6 graduate students who in the 50s in Philadelphia recorded frame-by-frame family therapy sessions. Okay, they recorded these and analyzed these frame by frame, and it was amazing. Shefflin had to get fairly drunk to tell me what was actually going on. Okay, he said, "Look," he said, No one had ever done that, frame by frame analysis of the actual behavior of people in small groups. And as you may remember, there was a lot of work on animal behavior before they did this. Shevlin would say, I don't give a good goddamn what's in your head, what poetry is in your head, all right? In your behavior, you've got a repertoire of maybe half a dozen things you're doing. Combat, courtship, greeting, parting, and a few others that he hardly, territory, a few others that he hardly, and he says, I can show you baboons doing the same goddamn thing. There is no freedom in the way we think we've got freedom. I mean, we've spun it out all as individuals, right? We're way past where any sane society would be in terms of championing individualism. In my, not that we don't prize our singularities, not that it can't be done, and it should be done, but not a mass society. That was one of Marx's mistakes, all right? Mass society, everybody lockstep. We don't want that either, all right? We need a culture based on difference. Anyway, I spent, when I understood that from working with Shevlin and working with Bateson, I got it in my head that maybe it's possible to use video to invent the repertoire of behaviors that we didn't have, that would give us more flexibility in behavior. So I went after the three-person thing, all right? Because in the analysis I was reading and what I could see, almost all our behaviors are based on two people. Two combined, you get three people together. What happens is the third person is ejected, the two people are reinforced, all right? Or the third person steals one of the people, all right? You look at baboons, what they do in the wild, you put a couple of, there's no free females in baboon tribes, but you put a male and a female out there, you bring a male in to activate the dyad, they get activated and reinforced, he gets thrown out, okay? What do humans do with this? Humans have eunuchs or priests or artists, who can't afford to run away with the mistress, But there's always a rival male in the configuration. That's how we've organized this three-person dynamic, all right? So anyway, I had money from the Art Council. That's the whole story. 71 to 75, I did like 45 hours of tape of people running around in threes, trying to figure out how you could invent triadic behavior. And I got it eventually. I got a yoga of relationships based on three-person relationships, right? And what it does is if you practice this yoga of relationships, it precludes double binds. It precludes 2 against 1. It precludes the confusion of I started that, you started that. I have a book that's coming out in February, Purdue University Press, called The Three-Person Solution, right? I've been working on this for a long time. And that's the pith of, that's the distillation of that work in terms of this relational pattern, all right? My argument is that if these, just like yoga, if you do yoga, you maintain your health, you maintain your sanity, as it were, you maintain your well-being. People who practice this practice, and it could be, 3 people or more. You can do this with 36 people, recombining and everything. You could have, in fact, a community of related people who could trust each other to produce something over generations, if this was the practice by which they did it, all right? So you could have small groups of people going out and interpreting ecological systems, all right? Not me as a great individual artist going out and showing you, my great vision, but communities of people who shared perception sufficiently so they could build up enough understanding electronically so that perception became the referent for policies and practices related to the environment. Not language. Think about it. These tools, film, video, we've crossed a threshold as a species. We can now perceive, we can share perception. I mean, it's fantastic, all right? It really is fantastic. That's what all the early videos were about. That's what these kids see when they jump on a camera. They're in fact sharing perception. There was a biologist named Waddington. He was actually a friend of Bateson. And after a study of modern painter, he did fruit flies and genetics mainly. But after a study of modern painters like Monet and guys like that, he said, look, our species has transmitted information over generations in 2 ways. One is genetically, and we share that with every other living being on the planet. The other is speech and writing. Speech and writing inevitably wind up with authority structures. No, don't touch that, the oven is hot. So the child's behavior is pulled away from his experience and perception and linked to the language commands of the adults. All right? Pretty soon you got George Bush telling you what to do. Because, you know, no matter what we want to say about language, we know enough about the structure of language that it has these contradictions, these Batesonian contradictions in it. And that's the whole analysis. But the idea, what I'm saying to you is that video and television could free us from our reliance solely on language and develop information transmission system married to environmental realities and not to speech or writing. And if you develop reliable information systems married to environmental realities, you've got a better chance, I think, of understanding the environment well enough not to destroy it. Okay. And the website I have, which is called earthscore.org, or something like that. Earthscore.org, one word. Earthscore is in fact a notation system for creating such a information transmission system. When you look at someone like, who's the Murch, the guy who edits, who edited Apocalypse Now, right?
Walter Murch.
Thank you, Walter, right?
Walter Murch.
All right, great editor, right? I of late read some of his stuff. I should have been reading him years ago. He argues for a notation system for creating film. Yeah. And he cites the 12th, 13th century in the West when the notation system for classic music was conceived. Right. Once you've got that notation system, then you've got Beethoven, then you've got Bach, then you've got Mozart, all right? Because they had a tool of composition, all right? What I'm saying to you is this Earthscore notation system that I've developed with all kinds of, could do that. If it can, it could be tested and found wanting, and some other one could be put forth, all right? You know, trial and error. This, I think, is a pretty, this notation system works on two things. Works on the people working in threes, so it's not dominated by anybody's perception. And that collaboration without language and with video enables them to build up a shared perception of the environment. In the perception of the environment, to push it a little more, there's a way to model events in the environment. The flight of geese, all right, the cycle of a freshwater lake, the ebb and tide of the Hudson estuary. All of those are recurring events in the ecology that could be systematically monitored, and we could say, okay, this flight of geese here is going to run into that jet. All right? The figures of regulation are in contradiction. How can we reorganize the flight plan of the human to respect the birds, and how can we keep the birds from running away with the whole damn thing? All right? How can we create an ecological intelligence about media?
Echo is logic.
Exactly, because originally we were antagonistic, right? During the Vietnam War, it was, here's my quarterback, go fuck yourself, NBC. I'm going to do it, you know. You son of a bitches got us in that war. It was Dylan. It was all of that stuff, all right? Very close to like cutting people's throats. That isn't going to work. I don't think, all right? What we need is not so much this media oppositional intelligence, but we need a media ecological intelligence. So that means not just video, but, you know, Blackberries and iPods and all the plethora of stuff we've got. How can you create social media for sustainability? Social media for sustainability with your iPods and small cameras and everything. Maybe small group, you know, sustainability SWAT teams. How do you do that?
Ninja.
Yeah. Something other than, all right, something that takes the spirit of public access and the intelligence that we've learned from doing that and really goes after sustainability and small groups and the use of media.
But don't you understand one thing that...
It's a lot of things I don't understand, yeah.
I got a list.
No. One of the old traditions was sitting around the campfire.
Harold, you have another battery?
I got an AC adapter?
And talking about the old stories.
Yes.
The ACAP tales. Telling the stories of tradition.
Yes.
And those from which the new generation learned.
Yes.
And that was oral,
Yes.
and it was group encounter, so you had people talking to themselves.
I have no, I mean, I value that, I like that, I just don't think it's going to get us out of the woods. I mean, if you look at the way yoga arose in India, right, historically,
the way it was because what happened was people who were telling the stories, all right? Harold, could I get some more water?
Sure,
please?
absolutely, will do. One ice? I'll get it.
No, just water. Historians I've talked about this who have looked at this culture, the argument is this, that the storytelling, all right, people began to distrust it. People said, yeah, these guys are telling a story, but you notice that they're all... May I finish? May I finish, please? You know, these are guys that are telling stories, but they're the ones on the big hill with the big houses. How does that always happen, you know? How does Bollywood happen? How does Hollywood happen, all right? The storytellers, you know, play the pipe, play the tune. And yoga arose out of a distrust of stories. Inside, not storyline. You get a good yoga teacher, they'll tell you today, stop the story. Pay attention. Be present. It's like your best moments with a video camera, right? You're not telling yourself a story. You're following a bird in flight. You're following a conversation that's fantastic. You're following a water movement, all right? It's an event happening in your mind like a fist in the hand. But it's not a story. It's not a linear narrative necessarily. Yes, you can develop linear narratives. They're incredibly valuable. I'm not dismissing them, but I'm saying for the kind of intelligence that monitoring and organizing a society calls for, stories are great, but they're not enough. That's the argument. Yes?
Along with your wonderings, have you developed some vision of developing an internet opportunity for the public to interactively redesign society?
I would argue that I myself don't know the specifics of that very well, but I have developed an abstract description that would make that more possible. And to be a little technical, all right, Bateson argues that a circuit is a unit of mind, all right? And what he gives the example, for example, of a man cutting down a tree with an axe, all right? In language-driven Western understanding, I am a man, am cutting down a tree with an axe. What's there to understand? I do. In cybernetic terms, it's a circuit of differences that make differences. Differences in what I see make differences in how I heft the axe. Differences in how I heft the axe make differences in how I strike. The differences in how I strike make differences in how I see, and then I'm going to do it again. All right? And he argues that a unit of a circuit is a basic unit of mind. And he goes through a lot of evolutionary stuff with it and argues that the unit of evolution is a unit of mind. All right? So I would argue that one of the things I did was I pushed Gregory for what's the criteria for a circuit. And if you read the literature, he developed 6 criteria. All right? Then I went ahead and developed a circuit that satisfies his criteria. All right? And that circuit is the basis of this notation system. And I would argue that this circuit is something that could, in fact, be used to develop what you're describing. All right? Where the public could be recursive with itself. You know, loop through what they've done. Loop through what the generation before has done. All right? And learn by self-correction how to use these tools in the kind of way you're describing. I don't have a lot of... I can do it abstractly.
I've been working on this myself.
Hey, you got one in the cellar. Good, we'll go do it.
But basically, what I...
Talk up because of the mic, right?
Thanks a lot, Earl.
Please.
Ambient. It seemed kind of simple to me, actually. What I have on the internet Joe Friendly's plan for peaceful but total revolution. And I try to develop a new way of language where I basically borrow from the Burma shave signs along the highway to just present the words in a starker I guess basically what I've done is I changed the printed convention to a sequence of signs, like Burma Shave. But in particular, when it comes to the question I asked you, how to envision an internet opportunity for the public to redesign society along sustainable lines, if we can get past the problem of ownership, just sort of ignore ownership, and just talk about the problems now and the way things should be if reason were to prevail, then basically I just divide it into like industries or institutions and say what's wrong with the way things are, have that, and what is the inherently that somehow points to the solution. Sometimes it doesn't, but to have an opportunity for people to assert what they think makes sense for the way things ought to be, and just mainly come up with the categories of what kind of changes we need.
You have two great allies that you may not know of. One is Tom Berry, who I mentioned earlier, who talks about taking on
the current society, the legal profession, the educational profession, the religious profession, and economic world, and figuring out self-organizing ways to change those, all right? So I would recommend to you his book called The Great Work. The other is a German sociologist named Niklas Luhmann, who died about 10 years ago. Fantastic cybernetic analysis of how society actually works, all right? He argues in the following way, that there is no unifying society thing now. What you've got are these self-organizing subsystems. So the legal system is autopoietic. It makes itself, all right? And it makes itself by turning everything into its own fodder. They're not concerned whether it's good or bad. They're not concerned whether it's evil or not. They're not concerned whether it's morally good or not. Is it legal? If it's legal, they'll take it into the legal system and they'll chew it the way the legal system chews it. The politicians are not interested at a certain point in all these ideals and everything. It's a question of power. Will this keep me in power or not? If it's yes, then I do this. If it's no, then I do that. Economic system. Is this profitable or is it not? Not profitable, not interested. All right. So the modern society we have has, he describes 8 of these self-correcting ideas. He describes the media in this way. There's a great book called The Reality of Mass Media by Niklas Luhmann. It's only 150 pages. It's a mind bender, but it's good, all right? And it describes what we were up against in terms of broadcast television, all right? He argues that, the media, as we fought it and know it, was in fact developed into a self-organized, starting with print. He takes a different view than McLuhan, starting with print in the 1500s. The system built up enough steam so that it could operate regardless of us. Self-organizing, autopoietic. And they want to know, is there news of a difference or not? We don't want yesterday's news, all right? The reporter only has to be right for today. He doesn't have to be right for history, all right? His deadline, he's got, there's a whole mechanism that Luhmann describes about the actual mass media. That I would say that the mass media is what's been sitting on our heads, what the public access movement, the early video movement was trying to take on, what we're still dealing with, and that if we're going to develop sustainable media, all right, that we have to see that sustainable media in terms other than mass media, all right? Not to, do our little social media thing and then give it to the networks, but build that social media in such a way that it connects to, genuinely to the neighborhood and to the ecology that's there. All right, if you can start looping our understanding through the ecological systems and through our neighbors, then we've got the beginning of getting somewhere. We've already got the beginning. It's operative in a lot of places. All right? It's just partly recognizing it.
Could you repeat the name of the book and the author again?
The name of the book is called The Reality of Mass Media. And by that he means both the reality of as they portray it and the reality of how they operate. All right? And the man's name is Niklas, Niklas, Luhmann, Luhmann.
Thank you.
Stanford University Press, I think it's about, they translated about 10.
Mass media, may I ask you, what is the difference between propaganda and mass media?
The man over here said nothing. In a sense, he's right. I mean, from Luhmann's point of view, that would be exactly right. That the mass media, no matter what the content is, the mechanism by which this works is, create propaganda. McLuhan used to say that, the most terrible source of propaganda is the mother tongue. I mean, language is the worst, the worst case of propaganda. The mother whispering words in your ears that you run around with and chase after, for the rest of your life.
But societal responsibility for mass media can be detrimental or for the good.
Yes. Well, it sort of takes us another way. Yes.
What's the fundamental difference between Luhmann's philosophy and McLuhan?
That's a tough one.
Was a prophetic literary rhetorical genius, all right? Yeah. And he worked by insight. Luhmann works in terms of systems analysis. Right? So he takes the cybernetic understanding and translates that into a sociology.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last one.
He takes cybernetics, which is a systemic way of thinking, and translates it into sociological analysis of modern culture. So when it comes down to actual media, Luhmann is only interested in what we call mass media and how it as a system arose. McLuhan, didn't give a damn. A canoe is an extension of the human. What can you learn by thinking about a canoe as a medium? What can you learn about money as a medium? What can you learn about eyeshadow as a medium? He didn't give a damn. His mind was so rich he could take on anything. And a lot of times he came up with duds, but a lot of times he came up with brilliant stuff.
Did you ever see the monthly that McLuhan put out to all the advertising agencies?
The Do Line?
I'm sorry, what?
The monthly was the Do Line? Or
Do Line, distant early warning.
Yeah. You came in a little later. I spent a year with McLuhan when he was at Fordham. I had an office 2 doors down from him. And he was
Something else.
He was something else.
He died a week after John Lennon.
Yeah. McLuhan had a lot of courage. People don't understand in a certain sense what it cost him to do what he did. I can remember his daughter telling me, all right, of going into the lunch room in Toronto with her father, and she's 14 years old, right? And his fucking colleagues shunned him. They wouldn't talk, they wouldn't acknowledge his presence, and he's got his kid with him.
In Toronto?
In Toronto.
Was it political?
Well, if you say to an academic that book you have has twisted your mind since the day you were born, and you don't understand it's been twisted, it's like, you got him right by the coyotes. I should watch my language. It's being recorded.
It's getting better.
Yeah.
Paul, could you come back to sustainability, the important issue and all that sort of.
And I wonder if we could, because I know you had truck or understanding with Bucky Fuller. I got some things here. Yeah. And do you think there's any hope along that line? We've raped the planet royally throughout much of the Industrial Revolution. He had a term ephemeralization, doing more with less. He had the analogy of a Telstar chip carrying as much data as 175,000 tons of copper cable across the Atlantic. Do you think there's any hope generally in good design and doing more with less, nanotechnology and some of those things to stave off the worst extensions of a sort of Malthusian view?
I think that the kind of design that Bucky did makes a lot of sense.
Or the concept.
The concept of design, I'm hesitant. I don't endorse it entirely. Bateson had his great distrust of design.
He did.
And he was such an observer of nature.
Yeah.
I went through a redwood forest with Bateson once, and it was fantastic. It was like he was so. What he saw was unbelievable, because he learned it from his father. His father was a naturalist. They went out for walks all the time, and Bateson saw. I remember going to a presentation of sea lions. Somebody had done a film of sea lions, and. So we went to see this. I think it was at Esalen or someplace like this. And we're walking back, and I said to him, at the time I was doing half-hour continuous tapes. To teach myself video, I had done things like, I learned Tai Chi and and learn to do it this way, right? So I would go by a stream or into a cornfield and just try and get into a Zen state and do this. Okay? So that was in my mind. So after we come from watching this guy with his otters, I turned to Gregory and I said, you know, he didn't leave the camera on long enough. Simple as that, you know. And Bateson said, yeah, you know, 3 minutes. What the hell can you learn in 3 minutes? I mean, Bateson spent years in Balinese culture with Margaret Mead doing film and still photography. First effort to take in, image-wise, what a culture was actually about. So at the New School, there's interesting things going on in design. They're trying to take sociology and design and put them together to figure out how to develop sustainability. Sustainability is a tricky concept, all right? It's already become slogan-eared. The language gets raped, you know, it's drinkability. What's drinkability? Why is ability a word that's becoming, why is that word form becoming so prevalent? I can't figure it out, but there's something there. That's when I'd like to say, McLuhan, what do you think? And he'd go, boom, you know. So I think you have to watch the terminology. Some of the people coming out of ecology are saying resiliency is a much more important term. How can you cultivate resiliency, the ability to bounce back? Bateson had this wonderful essay about New York City called Restructuring the Ecology of a Great City, in which he develops the idea of a budget of flexibility.
Yes, yes.
You know, budget of flexibility. What's a budget of flexibility, Gregory? Uncommitted potential for change. Uncommitted potential for change. Not a pile of money, uncommitted potential for change.
Uncommitted.
Yeah. So if you've got no, it can be to be used.
To be used. Okay, that's
a telephone switchboard that's full and everybody's using it can't take another call.
Right.
Its flexibility is used up. And the image he had is of a guy walking on a high wire, okay, with a pole, right? In order to maintain the basic premise that he's on the wire, he has to have a lot of flexibility at the edges. Whoa, you know, Philippe Petit, right? The guy who went across the tower, you know. That guy, you look at him work, he had a budget of flexibility in his muscles and his pole and everything. Uncommitted potential for change. You can't lock up the edge and keep it from moving up and down, you know, and expect that you can stay on the wire, all right? So a lot of times when they regulate our small things, you know, they say you can't, you know, somebody I was talking to was, you know, you can't, if you keep regulating the minor things, then the basic premise of staying on the wire becomes the problem. So how does the species maintain the premise that we're alive on this planet? You know, by a lot of chicken shit regulations? I don't think so. You got to learn to exercise the human in terms of the fullness and the splendor of the planet.
Could I ask you something? Uncommitted, what is it again? You said
uncommitted potential for change.
Would that be the Sloan Commission report on cable television said medium of abundance? Could that mean anything along the lines of Fuller's World Game Finding, that we may that we have a capability that we're not able to realize with our outdated institutions, but we have an ability to have a context of understanding of sufficiency or even abundance, as opposed to the history that James Joyce called a nightmare, or
scarcity.
Yeah, scarcity.
Yeah.
In meaningful terms.
You can deal with that, can't you? I can't deal with that like anymore. Yes, Harold. No, it's along the same lines.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and you know, Ivan Illich did a history of scarcity. He argues that the concept comes out of like the 11th to 12th century, and it's basically the way the motherfuckers manipulated us, right?
Yeah.
Saying there's not enough. Watch my language.
The light's okay the way it is.
It's all right? Thank you. Oh, except for you, I'm sorry. Yes, so all of those things, you know, where can we gain flexibility? How can you increase the budget of flexibility in New York City so that we could, in fact, be able to respond to the kinds of things we're going to have to respond to? NPR had a report on today of a scientist, a woman who was arguing that the carbon situation, it's a mistake to think that we haven't gone past an irreversible change. That if we just straighten up with the carbon, we'll go back to how we were. We'll fix it, it'll go back to what we... No. She's saying there's already clear evidence that we passed any kind of threshold, all right? of going back. It's an irreversible change, all right? A budget of flexibility is designed primarily to deal with irreversible changes.
Oh, resiliency.
Resiliency, budget of flexibility, yes.
Resiliency to bounce back from what?
Whatever it is.
We
Okay.
seem to be able to do it with fluorocarbons when the ozone layer was the Montreal Protocol. That was something that
Yeah. Didn't work. It was an effort, and it was a goodwill effort, and these things take generations. I don't mean to minimize it, but it did not become operative as law, you know, nor was it in the scientific basis of it sufficiently strong to say that those protocols were in fact the operative way to change.
Didn't it have an effect on society?
Yes, it has had an effect.
Yeah.
No, it has had an effect. I'm not trying to minimize it. Yes, there have been progress, and yes, people are working their ass off, and yes, there's a lot of good people doing it, and yes, I think somehow we'll figure it out. You know, I mean, but I think it's big bananas. Yes.
About the CO2 thing, that is being trapped somehow by the upper atmosphere, and that is part of what's causing global warming, no?
Yes.
So the idea is to let off the CO2 maybe.
I'm not enough of a scientist, but that sounds like risky business.
Something on the ground
No,
out there.
just let it off through the atmosphere somehow.
No, because it's a shield. You know.
What do you mean?
In other words, it.
The oxygen is the shield.
No. Do you know the Gaia hypothesis?
Oh, Gaia, yeah.
The Gaia hypothesis? No.
Yeah, this is a man named James Lovelock. Right? I'm not a scientist. This is where I go when I try and get a general understanding of what's going on. Lovelock was a British scientist. Lovelock's idea was, let me see. All right. Here's the deal. NASA hires Lovelock, who's an atmospheric scientist, all right, who invented a thing that measured the ozone in the atmosphere that led us to prove that Rachel Carlson was right, all right? NASA hires Lovelock, who lives in a wooded area in a stone house in the country in England, to help them figure out if there's life on Mars, all right? Lovelock goes to the people at NASA and says, blah, 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 blah. They talk. He says, well, look. He says, here's what I think. The atmosphere on Mars is like a boiled down soup, all right? There's no deals going on. There's no trade. There's no nothing going on, all right? So it's not alive. There's nothing going on, all right? So no, there's no life on Mars. So they promptly fire him. They don't want to hear that, right? He goes back to England, and he starts thinking about the Earth. And he says, holy shit, you know, if I went by the periodic table and I had 21% oxygen, which is the amount of oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere, if I had 21% oxygen in the periodic table, all right, it would be wacko. Because by the normal combinations of the periodic table, there would only be 3 or 4% oxygen in the atmosphere. But there's 21, and it stays at 21. And if it were 28 and a lightning hit the eastern woodlands, the whole forest would burn down.
Right.
All right? And if it's too little, a lot of the animals that have developed with the lung capacity would be gone. Same with the heat. All right? The temperature of the Earth, even though the temperature of the sun has gone up 20 degrees, temperature of the Earth has been pretty well constant.
For eons.
Eons, all right? Because it self-adjusts. Lovelock argues that the Earth is, in fact,
An organism.
a self-organizing, self-correcting organism.
Yeah.
Like a cat by a fire. You build up the fire, it moves away. You know, it's a self-correcting organism. So there's no quick fix, you know, plug the carburetor into the gas tank kind of solution. I mean, it's those scientists who have worked with Lovelock's hypothesis, which now is at least a weak version, is generally accepted throughout the cybernetic community, all right, are looking for the self-correcting mechanisms in the Earth itself. And that seems to be what we need to understand, right? What are the self-correcting mechanisms on the island of Manhattan? All right, what is that estuary out there? You know, what about the miracle on the Hudson? I mean, when the guys with the Hudson River crew got here, their first impression of, you know what the first impression of Manhattan was that these guys had?
The Dutch.
Yeah, Henry Hudson's boat. What were they marveling about?
The abundance of fish or salmon in the Hudson.
The fragrance. The fragrance. They love the smell. I mean, Robert Lowell calls the mouth of the Hudson an unforgivable landscape.
There was a documentary that was made a little bit ago about the little ice age. It was a film documentary. And the little ice age occurred in the 1700s towards mid-1800s. And there was an actual, such a freeze that came down out of the Arctic that you could walk from Manhattan to Staten Island on ice.
That fluctuation is relatively minor compared to like the terminal moraine that came down 10,000 years ago. But I mean, this place here, we don't know where the hell we live. Most of us might as well be living on a space platform.
We didn't do
We don't know
carbon
the plant
those
life.
days.
We don't say.
We didn't do carbon.
No, I understand.
We didn't do
Yes.
oil.
No, well, I agree. You're repeating the point you made that a lot of these things happen without us.
200 years ago, oysters and salmon, I believe, or at least all kinds of fish were extremely abundant. But oysters were like,
Yeah.
oysters was a major industry.
In Patterson, it was the same thing. At the bottom of the Great Falls, they say you could scoop them up with your hands, the oysters.
When I
They had
used
a
to-
law on
no, when I
Long
used to-
Island.
Excuse me, when I used to live in East Hampton, there was a law on the books that you could not have your servants have lobster more than 6 days a week.
It was considered a scat food. It was considered not a delicacy.
And now you have to pay $25 to get lobster.
Those, I should be winding down now. Yeah, no, well, for you maybe. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's a great work to be done in Tom Berry's terms. All right, this is that there is. Whether we like it or not, we're in a situation as humans where there's a challenge analogous to the Greeks building a democratic, quote-unquote, society, the Middle Ages building the modernism, the build-up of Chinese culture. We're in a similar place, and it has to do with trying to figure out how the human can realign itself and live with the planet in a benign way. All right, and that's obviously going to take generations. And my call to you is to say that this technology, which we all know, love, and have hoped our lives away thinking about, all right, is in my mind, really can deliver a lot of the goods that are needed for our species to learn to be self-correcting, self-organizing, and sustain itself. All right, that demands some sort of rethinking of public access and ecology. It could be. I mean, look, Obama is going to drop, what I'm hearing is over